All right, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Day. I'm an attorney at Mintz Levin, and I specialize in cybersecurity and cybersecurity incident response. And we're here today to talk about what happens when all of the things that you did in response to the last panel don't work out, and you get that phone call from hopefully your internal resources, possibly from law enforcement, maybe from an attacker themselves saying, hey, your data has left the building, and you may or may not have to give notice under state data breach or some of the federal laws that require notice. And so our team here today, we have a lot of experience helping companies respond to those kinds of incidents, both from a legal perspective and from a technical perspective. And we're here to talk today a little bit about what you should do, what you should consider, and basically how to respond to these kinds of incidents. Because unfortunately, if you have a data repository that contains financial information, sensitive personal information, or even just personal information, the chances are you're going to experience some sort of cybersecurity incident at some point in the future. Hopefully a long way away, but it's more than likely to happen to you. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Abe.
Sure. My name is Abe Smith. I'm in the IT security at Cepheid. It's a biomedical company. Been a consultant for about 17 years, so practically worked at every major Bay Area company as a consultant in some way or the other.
My name is Jon Miller. I'm the Vice President of Strategy for Cylance. Peter's actually our attorney. And for the last 17, 18 years, I've been doing penetration testing, ethical hacking, incident response, security research and development, all sorts of different fun things in the information security realm. But I'm very technical, and I've personally head up a couple large, Wall Street Journal cover story breaches.
I'd just like to add this. He was on 60 Minutes, and I wasn't. So just so you know, who's the celebrity here?
Twice.
Okay, twice.
April and then Labor Day again, and then I'll be on again. Yeah. Our Labor Day of this year, and then our Memorial Day. I don't know, the one in September. And then April earlier this year, and then I'm going to be on it again for their next cyber story that's coming up this season.
So gentlemen, I think we'll start with you, Abe, but what is the most common way that an enterprise learns that their data has been compromised or stolen, in your experience?
My experience might be somewhat unusual in that as soon as I get into a company, I put all the policies and procedures into place to let us know what's normal. So I won't name the companies because of the sensitivity of the data and the incident, but in every case when we had a data intellectual property theft, we knew about it either as it was happening or within a few minutes of it. We are lucky because we had policies and procedures that mark that, but in many cases, I'm sure Jon will get into, companies don't find out till 3 months later.
And so Jon, how have you seen companies learn about a cyber incident?
So a great example would be, Target, Home Depot, even the Office of Personnel Management, right? They're normally reported by a third party. So for a lot of the retail breaches, what's happening is you'll actually get the Secret Service out on the credit card forums where they're selling these stolen credit cards, and they'll buy batches of them incognito, and then they'll forensically trace while working with the credit card companies what the shared vendor was. So that's how Target actually got notified of their breach, was that the Secret Service showed up and said, hey, we bought a bunch of credit card numbers and they all came from you. The interesting thing with it is, I know the last panel talked a little bit about how a lot of the 90s were about protection, is what I heard, and I thought that was really funny. And then, 2000s were detection, and now we're on to IR. Target even detected the malware. They had a FireEye appliance. I mean, I hate to plug FireEye because their stuff doesn't work that great anymore. But they had a FireEye appliance there. After they got notified by the Secret Service, they went back to their FireEye appliance that had been there for months and months and months, and there was the piece of malware. It was sitting there. They had caught it, but the technology didn't actively stop anything. So even though a lot of companies are out there are focusing on, response or detection, everyone's a human here, and humans make mistakes, right? When you're dealing with large, complex networks, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of individual places that you can look for, what are commonly termed IOCs, or indicators of compromise inside of your entity. And I mean, a lot of times it's literally as simple as looking at the security products that are there and correlating out, what's real and what's not.
And just full disclosure, I represented Target, so we won't be going into the Target breach.
So I'd like to add to what he just said. In our case, at one of the customers, we knew exactly what was normal. And so when this intellectual property theft happened, the gentleman was in the process of copying out of the company more than 49 gigabytes of data. Two things wrong with that. Number one, it was on a Saturday and Sunday, which showed up as unusual for me. And the second thing, he was using a protocol that is not normal, and therefore it immediately bubbled up to the top. And when I clicked on it, it showed up the top 5 people who were doing the exfiltration, and it was the same person. When I looked up their information, they had very little information on the corporate database. And so all of these were flags. So we got to know what's normal, and we just got lucky. I'd like to answer a question that you haven't asked yet, which frequently gets asked in these kind of panels. Who should you be talking to? Should you be talking to the FBI or Secret Service? Full disclosure, I've worked with the Secret Service before, right after 9/11, but that's not my bias. The difference, in my opinion, of working with FBI and Secret Service is, with Secret Service, if during the course of the investigation, if they find that there is some issue that would embarrass your company, Secret Service will be more discreet about not publicizing it, whereas the FBI will sort of do what's right and go forward and not be as sensitive to your corporate needs. And that's probably the most delicate way I can say.
So Abe, let's dig in there a little bit.
Sure.
So in your experience, both of you gentlemen, have you worked closely with US CERT or Secret Service, FBI in incidents, or do you find that it's a case-by-case basis?
Just a few months ago, I was full on with FBI with the customer incident. They immediately responded. They came on board. They spent time with me looking at all the data I collected while the incident was happening, asked a lot of questions. Within a few days, they arrested the person, put them in custody for 30 days while everything was being investigated. So very quick response. It's when the thing goes to court that you can see the difference between the two. I'm not saying one is a bad person or a bad agency. It's just that they're less sensitive to your corporate embarrassment, if I may say so.
How about you, John? Do you work closely with FBI, Secret Service?
I've worked with both the FBI and the Secret Service, and I frequently work with US CERT. In December of last year, we published a breach report that's available on the Cylance website called Operation Cleaver, where we identified a group of Iranian actors hacking 52 global infrastructure companies around the world. And so we actually coordinated with US CERT to make sure that everyone was notified before we publicly released the report, so everyone could, search for all of the IOCs and eliminate them from the network. I can tell you this: I've been involved in I don't know, probably somewhere around 100, 150 breaches. I am the biggest fan of the first call should always be to your attorney, right? If you're engaging law enforcement or any type of third-party investigator, the first call should always be to your attorney, and then have the attorney actually go and bring those people in. There's always going to be a risk of some sort of public embarrassment, right? Especially with, so many of the notification laws that are in place now if, customer data or PII data has been breached. But we are corporate security, either consultants or practitioners, and you have to do what's best by the corporation before, getting in too deeply into the fun of going after the computer hackers. I will say this, in the majority of the cases that I've been involved in, there's been no legal prosecution, right? Many of them were across international lines, right? You're seeing a lot of attacks from China, a lot of attacks from, Eastern Europe and Russia that are financial related. You're starting to see breaches by countries like Iran and Syria. Um, and there's not really a lot you can do there from the Secret Service or the FBI's perspective, right? Especially, I mean, it depends on what your company is and essentially what they're after, right? Like if they're after some PII information and they're out of the country, kind of whatever, right? Like identify how they breached you, fix that vulnerability, make sure that you've done a thorough scouring of your network to find all of the back doors that they've installed, because hey, if you did get breached, the first thing they're going to do is make sure that they have some level of persistence in your network. So it's really this beautiful concert of bringing in security consultants that can, identify where the tactical vulnerabilities are, have legal working to deal with all of the regulatory compliance and international and national law, and then working with the team on site to make sure that you guys are hardened against them getting back in. I mean, there can be.
Let me just I'll repeat the question for the room. So the question was, even if an attack initiates from outside of the United States, there's oh, go ahead.
Like a terror cell. I mean, so for the majority.
I'll just repeat. So let's see if we can get the question right this time. So if there is an attack based in the United States, and an attack that is based outside of the United States but uses facilities in the United States, should you still use law enforcement? Was that your question? Okay, so is there always a local link in an attack against a U.S. company or a company within your country? A weak link. So,
well, I mean, there's always a weak link. That's how they're going to compromise you, right? When you look at the transport mechanism of the internet and how the traffic routes, sure, that traffic is going to flow from the attacker's country if they're based in that country, and absolutely there can be attackers that are attacking for a certain country that aren't based there, using things like VPSs, virtual private servers, and trying to obfuscate that traffic, right? Trying to make attribution difficult. For the most part, it's not as commonplace as you kind of think. A lot of times these guys, when they're hacking, especially right now, they're not super concerned with covering attribution as to where they're coming from, because they have no fear of legal recourse, right? Like, even if you catch them, so what, right? Like, I mean, we've got the Chinese hacking, I mean, the U.S. government, right? And all we do for that is bring people over and you have a meeting and you talk about how you're going to do something, and nothing ever really goes anywhere. For the most part, at kind of the cyber war, cyber terrorism level right now, there isn't a lot of sophistication in the policy, right? Like the policymakers, the lawmakers don't truly understand it. And because of that, you're essentially working in a consequence-free environment.
Do you have any thoughts on attribution and whether or not it's important to try to identify an attacker and give credit to an attacker?
Depends on the value of the attack. For instance, just a couple of days ago, we were being attacked with a brute force password guessing attack from 3 different countries spread throughout the world. But all 3 countries were attacking us with the same user ID and cascading down. So even though it was coming from Colombia and Belarus and some other country simultaneously, within a second, they were all using the same user ID and cascading down. So I knew it was all being controlled from a single source. So that's so much for attribution. They might as well just have attacked us from one because there's no point.
And that's traditionally what's called a VPS, right? A virtual private server. So you'll buy, for $200, you'll buy a VM server in Amsterdam or Colombia or whatever, pay for it in Bitcoin, right? Have it be untraceable, and now you simply have a spot to jump through.
So we have just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to open it up for questions. If anyone else had questions about cyber incident response or cyber attacks. Obviously, it's a huge topic that's very complex, and we've just skimmed the surface today. But does anybody have any questions in the room? Or no?
I'd like to broadly categorize the entire customer base into 2 groups. Those who have been hacked and know it, and those who've been hacked and don't know it yet. So in case you're wondering if you've been hacked, my CIO and my CEO always keep asking me the question, are we being attacked? And I
Do you feel that the consumer space is even, the market's even coming there, or is it just really enterprise?
So the question was whether there is a risk to consumers. Okay.
So depends on. So let me.
Is there a consumer market as opposed to do you see your products going in that direction?
So cybersecurity products and incident response products, is there?
I mean, so specifically, my company builds the first next generation antivirus, right? So we're the competitor to McAfee and Symantec and all their traditional players. And what makes us unique is instead of using signatures or dynamic technology like every AV's done for the last 20 years, we use machine learning, right? So we'll actually use machine learning to look at the DNA of a file and figure out if that file does bad things or good things before it runs. And we are 100% enterprise focused right now. Within 24 months, we'll be in the consumer space, right? It is just, it's such a huge threat surface, right? And you really have a lot of those Eastern European, Russian financial fraudsters that are preying on that area. One of the nice things about it to the consumers are if you get phished, if somebody steals your banking information, if they steal your credit card number, there's essentially zero liability for the user, right? If somebody breaks into your bank account, steals all your money out, the bank will put the money back into the account. It's not because they go and get the money, right? They just make you whole. And so a lot of the protection of the consumer space is genuinely getting driven by these financial companies that are taking write-downs in hundreds of millions of dollars, right, to support the payback of, this super vulnerable, very unsophisticated, consumer base. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a great example is, and everyone in this room will have seen it over the last couple months, chip and pin. Well, I'm sorry, chip and signature.
Chip and signature.
We have chip and signature here. But the actual rollout of those chip-based cards are because the credit card processors are pushing some of the liability back to the actual merchants to say, you know, if you take a stolen credit card and you don't check ID, yada, 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 you guys have to pay for it. And that's really what's pushing that out to the industry is just, you know, the different spots where you can push that liability. Once it goes there, people are going to start to react and do something about it.
Yeah, so unfortunately we've run out of time, but it was a sort of a short presentation, but I wanted to thank Jon and Abe for coming and thank you all for your questions. And you know, we'll be around if you do want to discuss further. We'll probably be out in the back, so hopefully it was helpful, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Peter.